Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to have back on the show once again child and foster care, religious abuse, child sexual abuse, trafficking, and satanic ritual abuse survivor and whistleblower, campaigner of historical child abuse, founder of S.A.F.E, Seek and Find Everyone Abuse in Childhood, independent researcher and reporter, podcast regular on the show, and someone I feel deeply honored every day to call my friend, Dave Sharp. Here is a little bit about Dave's testimony and advocacy work in case you're new here, or if you happen to have missed any of his 3 other episodes we've done together. From the moment he drew his first breath, Dave was an orphan, entrusted not to loving arms, but to the care of the Catholic Church, a place that should have been a haven of mercy. Instead, it became the gateway to 16 years of unspeakable torment. From infancy through adolescence, he was trafficked through Scotland, passed like a shadow between hidden houses in Glasgow's darkest corners, where men sworn to holiness orchestrated rituals of pure evil. Dave and countless other children were drugged and delivered to satanic sex parties, violated by multiple predators amid scenes of calculated depravity. These were not random cruelties. They were the work of an organized network that deliberately targeted the most defenseless, orphans and children with no family, no voice, and nowhere to turn. His tormentors were not strangers in the night. They were the very priests, nuns, and officials who had vowed to protect him. The system meant to shield the vulnerable became the perfect hunting ground, proving a harrowing truth. The safest place for a predator is the one that grants unlimited, unquestioned access to children. Yet out of this abyss rose an abdominal spirit. At 16, Dave shattered his chains and stepped into freedom, though the scars walk with him still. Survivors seek him out, drawn to his unbreakable courage, sharing testimonies that echo his own. These are not isolated tragedies. They are the unmistakable evidence of a rot that ran deep, hidden behind collars and titles. Dave could have retreated into silence, letting the darkness claim victory. Instead, he chose to become a blazing light. For decades, he has stood tall, risking everything to give voice to the broken and hold the powerful accountable. He has endured threats, gaslighting, and the crushing secondary wounds that come with confronting monsters cloaked in sanctity. Today, he fights from the very edge, yet refuses to surrender the truth that nearly destroyed him. But make no mistake, Dave is no mere victim. He's a warrior forged in the fire, anchored by a profound and unshakable faith in Jesus Christ. In his darkest moment, he proclaimed with gratitude, quote, "I am so grateful that God has chosen me to go out and show the evil that exists in Scotland and to tell the world to put his children first." And that is exactly what Dave will be doing today. For weeks on end, Dave has been traveling across Scotland, campaigning for and connecting with countless other survivors across his country. And today we will hear the continued testimony of Dave's advocacy work and what he has learned and discovered on his journeys. You will definitely not want to miss a moment of this episode. What Dave had discovered is disturbing, concerning, and upsetting, yet he brings hope to this conversation. There is simply no one who has pieced together the dirty underbelly of Scotland like Dave has. And with the sadness also comes revelations of solutions, healing, and ways we can stop this epidemic on our children in its tracks. Every testimony Dave carries, every survivor he uplifts, every buried truth he unearths lays another stone in the foundation of a brighter world, one where no child is ever again delivered into the hands of wolves disguised as shepherds. Dave's body may bear the marks of hell, and his nights may still echo with its screams, but his soul burns with the fire of resurrection. He has turned the darkest chapter of his life into the greatest victory of light over darkness. Through his courage, evil has been named, faced, and defeated, not by swords or vengeance, but by the quiet, relentless power of one man who refused to let the grave keep him. Dave is living proof that even the most shattered lives can become cornerstones of hope. From an abandoned orphan rose a true shepherd, a protector, a living testament that God can take what was meant for destruction and forge it into salvation for generations. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, man of God, voice for the voiceless, survivor and overcomer, anti-child abuse advocate and campaigner, walking miracle and warrior, the one, the only, Dave Sharp. David, is an honor to have you back again today. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Every time I come in, your introductions get bigger and bigger. I feel like there's a movie coming and Charlton Heston's going to play the lead role. It's quite an introduction. Thank you very much again, Emma.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's an honour to come. It's always an honour to come in and talk to you. Yeah, we've been doing some work lately to do with the grooming gangs. And marrying it up with what's been happening historically. And again, when you talk about my testimony, just a brief for those people who haven't heard my story before. I spent 16 years in the care system. I was actually one when my mother died. I found out I had a younger sister. But yeah, I spent all my childhood in the care system. From the age of 8 to 12, I've got no memory at all. This is where I was getting passed around from place to place. So that's where we believe the abuse started. And then into another home where I was trafficked, put into satanic ritual abuses in Ireland, in Scotland, in many different places. And the interesting thing is, Emma, that I've been talking to you for a couple of years now, and I talk to a lot of people in America who talk about this subject are far more open than we do. And when I'm listening to you there, I still have, we spoke about this before, I still have these kind of things going through my head where I constantly see myself in a coffin. You know, I constantly see myself with a rope around my neck, being hung by ropes. And I constantly ask myself the same questions about, you know, about these coffins, about how I survived that how long I was in, how did I manage to survive? We've heard different stories of holes being drilled into the thing. But I also ask, I've yet to meet anyone anywhere who can explain to me these lost times, you know, from the age of 8 to 12. I've yet to sit down with a professional or been invited to sit down with a professional who can actually explain these things to me. You can read stuff about this, but the personal touch that goes around your previous life and your life since, so much involves that period, because however short it was, there's a period of your life that you have to explain away to people. And sometimes you might have an audience or a personal conversation with someone who you might not want to bring that subject up. And there's always that gap that you have to overcome and jump over in order to keep the truth. And that's so important, because the truth is something that's obvious, quite a lot distorted, not by the victims and survivors, but the perpetrators and the establishment who like to, you know, when we go through these things our whole lives as a child, they know from a very early age, that by the time we leave these places at 16, our minds will be so destroyed that it will be very difficult for anyone to believe us. And it's only when we come across other survivors and campaigners like yourself who are able to bring it out of us and help us explain and understand what it is we're going through, then A, we can encourage more people to come forward, and B, we seek the truth about who, what, and where. And I think it's safe to say now, Emma, we're getting to a point here where, you know, we know there's some really, really dark stuff goes on in the world, and a lot of stuff that we don't know. But hey, we've got a lot, thanks to people like you, we've got a lot more survivors coming forward, and we've got a lot to be positive about. And our stories are so important. And amen. I mean, I'm a walking miracle. I am a walking miracle. You know, what I've been through is just incredible. So yeah, it's quite a life. It's quite a story. And again, 25 years homeless, and then I met my wife, and my wife died in my arms. And then it was 25 years of campaigning. And that campaigning was mainly about historical abuse. But then we sort of drive into early 90s, late 90s, early noughties, when we see things changing, and the perpetrators change, which is what we'll go into tonight.
You are absolutely right. You are a walking miracle. And one of the things that your testimony really touches my heart with is hearing these horrific things that you went through as a child, and then seeing the adult that you grow up into, despite having, you know, examples of what a healthy adult is in your life. You were surrounded by just all these heinous, horrific perpetrators, and, you know, people that didn't keep you safe. And somehow you not only survived the hell that they put you through, but you just turned into this literal earth angel who is so devoted to helping other people and sitting with the broken and listening to them and holding their stories and giving them hope, and, you know, just being just an amazing advocate that people have never had before. You grew up into the adult that you needed as a child, and it's amazing to see you in action, getting out there and campaigning more and meeting new people and hearing new testimonies, getting new pieces to this puzzle. And so one of the things, and I'll have you talk a little bit more about it, that I really wanted to bring you on to talk about is in these, especially this last month, you've been really traveling and getting out into the communities around your country and even beyond. You know, I'm sure you're hearing testimonies now from people everywhere because your name's kind of getting out there more, which is wonderful. And so I wanted to just talk to you about this and what you discovered on your journey. I know that you've been getting more involved too with the grooming gangs and understanding that piece of the puzzle a lot more, along with all this clergy and religious abuse, care home, and all the way up institutionally, how you said the people in power are also keeping this information suppressed from the public. So let's dive into that a little bit and talk about what made you want to go these, you know, 1,700 plus miles across your country, and how did that sort of idea come about to where you ended up doing it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the one big connection between historical and present, the one big connection that keeps it all together, Emma, is of course the care system. And what this shows, what's happening now, shows how the care system has been exploited, ignored, abused, used. A lot of people are making money out of it. So more and more people are trying to shut us down. More and more people are shutting doors. More and more people are sleeping very well at night, thank you very much, knowing the mortgage is okay for the next 10 or 20 years. And we find the proportion of this is so much higher now from sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago, because childhood trauma has become more profitable than drugs. Child exploitation is becoming more profitable than any other drug available. And what we're finding is that we're in this battle, and what I keep saying is that I spent 16 years in the care system, as you know. I suffered horrific child sex abuse. I was trafficked all over Scotland and Ireland, put into these ritual abuses. I met many other survivors over the years who'd been through the same things. Many were silenced, many disappeared. And when you do the campaigning that I've been doing for sort of 30 years, what you see is that the turnover, if you like, if that's the right word, from historical child abuse, which predominantly in the care system was the Catholic Church, where it changed to these grooming gangs. And again, the one common denominator is the care system. And at the age of 66 now, people say to me, has anything really changed, Dave? And the answer is no. Because as I've said to you before, Emma, there's this big thing in Scotland where over the last 70 or 80 years, for 50 years, no one cared about the care system. Everybody ignored it. The Catholic Church and the churches, other churches, and the establishment, whether it's the Labour government or the S&P government, they did a very, very good job of silencing not only the survivors, but also the families of. So if you imagine that in a 50-year span, and then you look at it, we're going to start doing a child abuse inquiry. If you then start to look at the finances, you can kind of see the kind of money that we're talking about and why so many people are very keen to keep this silenced. Because even back in 2010, 2011 and 12, when many of us were campaigning on the streets for a child abuse inquiry, the figures then were about 350, 400 million pounds. If you follow that on 10, 15 years later to now, you're talking closer to £1 billion, between 850, over 850 million pounds. A lot of people want to keep that quiet. Now, as it has been said many times, Scotland is one of the few countries left in the world where the Catholic Church is more powerful than the government, mainly because most of the government works for the Catholic Church. And when you talk about the child abuse inquiry, not only have the Catholic Church got a seat at the table of decision making, they're at the head of the table. Everybody needs to be clear about that and understand that. They have foots in the education system and every other system in society. And what we are saying is this is a small enough country. If we get enough people backing us, if we get enough people searching for the truth, if we get enough people willing to smash down these doors and expose these people, we're a small enough country, we can make our country the safest country in the world. And I refuse to ever admit otherwise, because we can. And the battle we have, as I say, is from the early 70s, when we were coming into the homes. I'm 66 years of age now. From the early 70s, when we were all coming out the care homes, this is when we had a mad influx of addiction, homelessness, and prison inmates. They all rose dramatically. And nothing's changed since, because no one dared or would stop and talk about it and deal with the issue. Then if you fast forward to the 80s and the 90s, then you start to see this problem with these grooming gangs coming into the country, and the Catholic Church have fled these care homes. They run very few now. They fled these care homes and they went back into the ownership of the state. But what the state didn't do was they didn't properly regulate these care homes. So what that did was it enabled these people, anybody, to crawl up the ladder into a position of power, to go in and, just like a sweetie shop, go in and help themselves to our children. And that's what happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And as you know, I've been campaigning now for a number of years. And when we were on the streets, we've seen this crossover, if you call it that. We've seen this crossover from people talking about institutional abuse to being about the church and certain Freemasons and various other organisations, football clubs. And then very slowly we started hearing about these Asian gangs. And when I remember trying to explain this and report this to the charity I was working with and I was a client of, and I even remember mentioning it to the police. And it was very much as it was in England for many, many years. You can't use the R word. Racist. We all saw what happened in England. In England, we had what was a nuclear explosion, when all of a sudden a report came out to say that 1,400 young girls had been sexually abused in Rotherham, predominantly in the care system. And that was a nuclear explosion that just the rest of the world didn't even believe it. But slowly and slowly, we all started hearing what had happening, town to town, city to city. And nobody thought for a minute, well, this isn't happening in Scotland. You never hear anything about this in Scotland. You know, it must just get to the border and turn around. Everybody actually believed that. And as I say, from 2010, 12, 13, I wasn't aware of it then. I'd be lying if I said I would. But from 16, 17, 18, we started hearing stories. And I found myself being shut and silenced very, very quickly. So that's when I decided I was going to go down to Rochdale. So I contacted some friends and people in Rochdale, and I decided to hold this rally. And I made a big flag of the 5 countries in Britain and Ireland, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and Ireland, and I sewed them all together. And I went down to Rochdale and I said, you know, this is a UK-wide problem. This is happening in Scotland, but I don't know what's going on. I want you to tell me. So these guys in Rochdale were able to tell me, and then we did a march through Rochdale with these banners, and we shouted. I was at the front shouting. I was the loudest, as always. And we went through Rochdale and we raised awareness. The videos are on my tweet for anybody to see. And that gave me a better understanding of what was happening. And then when I went back home, I started doing my own investigating. And I started going back into these police records and started to discover all these different cases going back to 2010 onwards, and where there was these 2 or 3 very, very high profile cases involving 30, 40 young girls and the same amount, or even 40, 50 men who were all operating in the north of Glasgow. And these cases had been investigated and got to the point where they went to the Procurator Fiscal. And then at the very last minute, the cases were pulled. So we started hearing from women, some who were sex workers, some who were in the care system, who were around their late teens and early 30s, who'd been there. And when we started, I remember we started, myself and a mate of mine, we started looking up at the FOI's Freedom of Information. We started looking at these freedom of information around the time when we knew the case had been stopped. And then we looked at all these FOIs and we seen the answers people were getting from the police. This is a section 26. Under the Children's Act, we're not allowed to say anything. Or they would just say, the case is still ongoing, we can't answer any questions. Then you start to see, hang on a minute, are we actually seeing what's happened in England? Is this actual evidence that this is happening in Scotland, what happened in England? Now we're starting to get worried, you know, speaking to certain charities, other charities and people. And then I started meeting young girls who were in the care system, talking about paedophile groups. And then we start asking questions. They didn't talk about Asian gangs, Emma. It didn't come up. Everybody assumed it was white gangs. Everybody assumed it was institutional abuse at the hands of the church or various paedophile rings that were running around the country. And the exact same thing happened that happened in all these towns and cities in England, where the actual ethnicity was wiped out. Nobody spoke about the ethnicity. But then I started researching other things, other different podcasters and various, what do you call it when somebody's doing forums, different forums and things like this. And I started reading things. I thought, hang on a minute, this is actually quite big. But this is the point where I suddenly had false allegations made against me. This is the point where my life turned upside down. I'm not saying it was because of this, but people coming up to me and saying, you know too much. You need to be very careful. You need to watch yourself. You need to be careful. All this stuff, you know. And I did know a lot. I knew an awful lot. But I didn't think for a minute, you know, knowledge is power. Yeah? Knowledge is power. I've never, ever, I think you know me well enough now, I've never been a person who's seeking power. I don't know what that means. You know, the only time I feel power is when I've got more than £10 in my pocket. You know, I've got security, you know, now you have £10. I don't seek any kind of power. I don't know what that, because I've lived this inferiority complex life my whole life, where I've always had to play catch up just to fit into society because of my lack of education and because of the abuse and because of the trauma that I've carried my whole life. I've never, you know, I took a leading role when I started my campaign, but that was after a lot of fighting and pushing for the truth, you know, when I became a Christian and Christ came into my life and changed my whole life and made me into this warrior. But at this time, I didn't understand what I was fighting, Emma, because you see, when I was homeless for 20 odd years, I was very streetwise. Even though I got stabbed 3 times, I got hit with an axe in the head. I knew the rules. I knew the rules. If you do something wrong, you're going to pay for it, and I did in a big way. When I became born again back in 1998, when I became born again and I started living that straight life, and I gave up drugs, and I had to re-educate myself. I remember I used to go in the newspapers, and I used to find these evening classes with REBT, things like that, or CBT, and it was a 10-week program. And I had to get on the bus for 2 hours to go to these places. And what I would do is I'd get a sleeping bag, and I'd get there early, and I'd find somewhere that I could sleep in the graveyard or somewhere on the streets. And I'd go to these classes, and then I'd go out and sleep rough, and then get the bus in the morning. Sometimes they didn't even know, and there's me, I'm turning up with my jeans, my jean jacket, and my long hair. And I'm about 6 stone, I'm clean from drugs, but I'm still recovering. And I'm next to these nurses and trainee psychologists and psychotherapists and things, That's how I got my education. But then when I started getting jobs and things like that, I couldn't understand how, if I was good at my job, I only did call centre work. If I was good at my job, the better I got, the more people would get upset and fall out of me. And I didn't understand this. I didn't understand all this kind of behaviour, and how very quickly you became a loner just because you were good at something. So this is me trying to educate and fit into society. So, and I have been naive most of my life. If you spent 16 years in the care system, you've got no memory of any education, which I don't. I don't remember, I was abused all the time. I don't have any memories. And then 20 odd years homeless on the street, surviving, injecting drugs every single. I still carry my track marks as not a war trophy, but I carry these track marks. I've been clean now since 1998. I don't do any drugs at all. But wherever I went, I was always an underdog. Not an underdog. I was always I was hyper vigilant. I was hypersensitive because I didn't know my place until I knew my place, but the place was in me, about me being myself. So when I joined this charity to help me, and then I got a bit better, and then I started my own group, S.A.F.E, I thought I was safe. I thought I was okay. I thought, and I got some compensation, and I thought then I could do something with my life positive, with all the tools, not with this money, but all the tools that Jesus Christ has given me. He is the truth, the way, and the light. If I follow in his footsteps, nothing can go wrong. But I had no idea how wrong I would be. And the charity that I was actually working for and helping, they didn't like the fact that I was getting all the attention. They didn't like the fact that I knew too much. Other people started, people would turn up at me and say, "You need to come and join us. You can't do it yourself. You need to come." I said, "Excuse me, I don't need to join anybody. I'm okay where I am." And again, cut a long story short, before I knew it, I had false allegations made against me. And then I ended up in prison. And still to this day, I have no idea why I ended up in prison. I really don't have. But again, that was 2.5 years ago. And then I came out. Then the grooming gangs things was keep going and keep going. And I knew enough to know, I'd learned enough, studied enough, spoke to enough people just by going on the streets and learning from people about what was happening. And I knew that a number of people, a very, very high number of people, had been silenced, discredited, isolated, criminalised, gaslighted, accused of stalking. All these things that I've been talking about for years, which had happened to people from institutional abuse. Anybody spoke about the Catholic Church, you were silenced. Now, same thing was happening with the grooming gangs. So I was getting a better picture of seeing that what's actually going on here is just the team's changed. The game's not changed. It's just the away team's changed, right? Yeah. The ethnicity's changed. Something's changed. But the abuse didn't change. The abuse was just the same. And that's when I started talking out more. And I realised that things were happening at a very fast pace in the early 2020, when we suddenly had this outburst of grooming gangs, county line gangs. Yeah, you heard of these? Where they take these guys are running through, rampaging through the country and doing the most horrific thing to children and taking over people's houses and then doing some really bad stuff to very vulnerable people. So that's when I decided, I said, I'm going to start concentrating on this and doing more, raising awareness of this. So I started writing about it sort of 2021, 22, and then I started noting all these different cases that I'd been speaking about and things. And then I realised that there was a serious level of cover-ups in relation to the drug deaths that's known throughout the world. Because I've always had this problem, Emma, in Scotland. We have a real problem with the drug deaths, as you probably know, yeah? Yeah? But nobody ever wants to stop and actually talk about the underlying issues. Why? Because nobody wants to talk about child sex abuse.
Right.
Everybody nobody talks about child sex abuse in Scotland. This is why I've been threatened so many times. This is why people wanted me silenced. This is why it was so easy to silence me. All of a sudden, when I had these false allegations made against me, all these people who you expect to help people in my situation, who's 16 years in care, 25 years homeless, my pregnant wife dying in my arms, that is a lot of trauma. That's a lot of trauma. Somehow I got back up and I managed to fight on, and I joined this charity. These people knew what I'd been through. The police knew what I'd been through. Everyone knew what I'd been through because I stood in Parliament many times, sharing my testimony with people, sharing my testimony with the world. And everybody was calling me Scotland's #1 child abuse campaigner. So how did I go from being Scotland's #1 child abuse campaigner to all of a sudden, I'm accused of these, and all those people who are supposed to help people like me, all of a sudden I felt like I've got this gun to my head and all these people are queuing up to pull the trigger. And I'm phoning, I'm emailing, I'm campaigning outside police stations. Will someone please listen to me? I know this has been happening for years and years, but listen, I'm a good guy. I got accused of assaulting a woman. I said I would never, ever harm a woman, but nobody listened. Nobody listened. I went to the police, they wouldn't listen. I had this lawyer who just basically refused to speak to me. He refused to meet me and show me the evidence of what I'd done. And as I say, when I went into prison, they put me in a suicide cell for 5 days and 5 nights. And when I came out, I found a prison that was full of Dave Sharps. All these other men that had been through similar stories to mine. And then when I went into an office with the prison officers, they said, Dave, you can't talk about child sex abuse in here. We know who you are. We know you're a high-profile child abuse campaigner, but we don't have the resources or the staff to deal with this issue. And I was so shocked. I said, excuse me, what about all those men and women who have spent their whole lives going through the revolving doors of addiction, crime and prison, being released in addiction, crime and prison, being released into addiction, crime and prison their whole lives? And those of them who have children in between, who grow up, who can't function in these dysfunctional families, they end up in the care system and then they have got addiction, crime and prison. We have this factory in Scotland where we're creating our own criminals. We're creating our own victims for these criminals to abuse. And no one is willing to press the pause button and say we need to stop and talk about this. So it feels like it does feel like, Emma, God's chosen me to do this. Even when I went into prison, before I went to prison, I was allowed one phone call. And I phoned a woman who's very high up in the political field in Scotland. And I said, they've sent me to prison. And she said, her words to me were, what you've just shown is how easy it is and how the Scottish justice system treats victims and survivors of child sex abuse in the care system. And I said, that's right. That's exactly true. That's what's happened. And I got put on suicide watch when I came out because I couldn't believe, after I spent 5 days in the isolation cell with this sort of metal suit on to stop me committing suicide, I then got a cell of my own, and every time the door went, I thought they were coming in to rape me. All my childhood was coming back from the care system, and I started going out and I started going in the bins and picking up face masks. And I picked the face masks up and I started cutting them up, and then I made a noose and I tried to hang myself twice, and twice it snapped. And I thought, you've just got to get on with this. And again, most people knew who I was, and one guy came up to me and said, my wife's a social worker and she knows you, and you'll be all right in here, nobody's going to touch you, you're going to be fine. And then the next thing I know, when I'm on the exercise yard, I've got all these men coming up and talking to me. I say, I'm not supposed to talk, I'm going to get in trouble if I speak. And I want to help people, but this is a situation I found myself in. So then when I came out of prison, I thought, this is just another chapter, Emma. This is just another chapter in my life. I'm not going to go into run off and become an alcoholic or go back on drugs. I've got to tell the world what's happening here. The world has got to know. Because again, if you remember one of our previous conversations, 25 years ago, 2001, when I was in Brazil, I was at a Christian event in Sao Paulo, and it was a child abuse event, and there was a lot of nuns there, there was a lot of priests there, there was a lot of nearly 100,000 people at this huge event. And this pastor says to me, he says, Dave, your story is very, very powerful, very, very powerful. He said, you're going to be used by God. He said, the stuff that you've been through and how you've come out the other end, the way you talk, the way you carry yourself, the passion, the understanding, everything that you've got, which, we sometimes hear you at night time singing, praising God, when I was in my tent in Brazil, and they're thinking, are you sure he hasn't sneaked in a bottle of vodka? Because nobody should be that happy. And I'm just happy to be serving God. I just love being a Christian. I just love whatever's happened to me. I say, the Bible says we will suffer. The Bible says that. And I'm just happy, so happy that God chose me to do this work. And they're going to have to have a JCB digger to hold me back, because whatever happens, I'm not stopping. I'm not stopping, because once you've got the truth on your side, nothing can stop you. And what's happening now is in Scotland, we're getting to a stage now with the grooming gangs thing, that more and more people now who were scared to talk before, all of a sudden we're finding more people want to talk, Emma. In the last week alone, since I went to Scotland, I've had over 450 new followers in less than a week.
Amazing.
I had over 1,000 likes for the tweet I wrote about the grooming gangs. And I'm going to move forward and I'm going to give you a bit of a taster of what I'm going to be talking about, right? This is the notes. I had a phone call this morning from an MSP, a Scottish Parliament member, a Labour MP, and I spoke to her, and I told her everything that happened, and this is what I said to her. I said, this is what's happening in Scotland now, right? This is one town. This is it's a village of 3,000 people. And what happened is the grooming gangs came in, ran amok, took over the houses, flooded the area, and this is what happened. A whole town was silenced. A young girl had fireworks taped to her legs and set alight. The area was flooded with drugs, and these grooming gangs got young boys into debt. These gangs made young boys go into rooms and fight each other, and the winner gets free drugs while the other gets another beating off the grooming gangs. These guys giving young 13, 14-year-old girls drugs, then photographing them in decent poses and flooding them on the internet, threatening to rape and groping women on the streets. This is the bit that we're ready for this now. This is the serious bit, right? A huge rise in suicides and drug deaths in the area, which went unnoticed and underreported, to the extent that the local undertaker was even silenced. Even the undertaker was silenced. So this is where we're at now, where I've got this information, and this week I'm supposed to go to Scotland to meet these MPs to talk about this, because we are so close now. And as I say, if we go back we'll go back to 5 years ago again, or since I left prison nearly 3 years ago now, more and more people were talking about it. More and more, what I would say to people is, if you name any town or city in Scotland, put the name and then put grooming gangs, you'll find there's barely a town or a city where this isn't happening. And still, the Scottish government are not happy or are not convinced. They still want more evidence. Even though they know about what I told you about in 2021, 2022, 23, we had these different Operation Dash, Operation Sarah, Operation Cosworth. These were 3 very high profile cases where they say in each case 35 to 40 young girls, all in the care system, all average age of 13. We gave their testimony. The police on the streets went in, gave all the evidence to the CID, who passed it all on to the Crown Prosecution Service. Now we know, because I've spoke to police officers who said at this time, the police officers on the street were ready, the chief inspectors, whatever, they were ready to go public to the nation, or to the world, and say, we're ahead of this. We are not going to let this happen in Scotland. What happened in England, we are not going to let it happen. They're ready to go public with what do they call it, a news flash, in front of the cameras. And at the very last minute, bang, cases dropped, unreliable witnesses. The exact same thing they did in England, where they make out these young girls to be prostitutes. They made out that these girls were doing this as a life choice. They made out these girls all had mental health issues. They were all drug addicts. They were 13 years of age. 13, and they all disappeared. They all disappeared off the face of the earth. Where are they? We're going to find them. We're going to find them. So in 2021, 22, we've got this big mad influx, and then we've got internet, we've got the English child abuse inquiry, we've got England talking about the grooming gangs, and more people, not just me, by the way, I'm not taking all the credit for this, there's many other people, we're pleading, hey, look up here, guys, look to Scotland, we need your help. It's happening up here as well, and we're all being silenced as well. Please help. And nobody even thought. Everybody thinks you get to the border between England and Scotland and these gangs somehow turn back. Why, don't they like our water? Or, but then we found out what they were doing was, what I discovered is, they stopped using their cars. They were going into all these cities and towns, but they were using these big flash cars with the number plates on. So the police kind of quickly caught onto that, and they were stopping them on the motorways, on the highways, and arresting them. So what they started doing was they started going up the west coast of Scotland on the rail lines. It's called the West Coast Rail Line. They started going on all these trains and stopping at all these leafy, quiet little places. Now, the place where I went is where I grew up. And my first home, when I was born to 8, is in Kilmarnock, which is Ayrshire, where this place happened. And something very, very strange happened. I'll just take a drink, Emma. Yeah, something very strange happened. As you know, I spent my first 16 years in care. So when people say to me, where are you from, Dave? It's not a question I can answer. And I've got to either sort of get round the question, especially when you're going for a job, especially in England. If you're going for a job and you meet another Scottish guy, and the Scottish guy says, hey, I'm from Glasgow, where are you from? And you go, I'm from Glasgow too. I was born in Glasgow, but as I say, I spent my whole youth in the care system. But when I went to this place, I followed this trail from the borders of Scotland. I went up all the west coast, all the way across. It took me 6 days, staying in different places, and I found out where these people lived, where these people operated. And I knew we'd heard stories before about a certain village where it's called Auchinleck. So that's Auchinleck, Auchinleck. You can't Google it about the riots because for some magical reason, everything about what happened has been erased. all the forums, all the videos, everything's gone magically. But what happened is these gangs went up and they went into this small village and they rampaged through it. And they had these young girls, they taped these fireworks to their legs, and they flooded this with high level cocaine and crack cocaine. And they got a lot of these young kids addicted, and a lot of kids overdosed. And as I say already, these certain things happened. And so I went up there and I found a place, Emma, honestly, I found a place that with the most beautiful, kind, loving, you can't ask for directions because you'll get in a 10-minute conversation because they're so caring and kind and nice people. And I got really emotional because this is where I'm from. And I said to a few people, I'm from here. I said, this is why I talk too much. It's nothing to do with the child abuse or the drugs I took all my life. It's because I'm from a place like this where everybody's so friendly and happy. And that's how I felt. It was amazing. I felt at home. And then I started thinking, I don't do anger, Emma, right? I've dealt with my anger, right? And I started thinking, how could anybody allow these people to come up here and destroy this place? How could you do it? Such nice. And what I discovered was, there's a town next to it, just a mile away, called Cumnock. So the two of them are more or less joined by the hip. And I went there as well. And I found a whole area of people who are terrified to speak out. But it took me a while to realise they're not actually terrified. They're not just terrified. They're in mourning. Because every so often I kept meeting somebody that said, oh, I lost somebody. Or my brother died. Or my sister, my cousin OD'd. And I'm starting adding up all these deaths. And I'm thinking, this is getting a bit poisonous. This is getting a bit scary. I thought, I wonder what would happen if I came up and did a campaign here and put up my banners and stood on the street for 2 days. I wonder what would happen if I would get chased, or would people come and talk more? And I put on the armour of God and I told everybody what I was doing. So I kind of finished my 6 days. What happened is I got in touch with some people, quite a few people, through Twitter and through various things. And I discovered these women who'd stayed there, but left 10 years ago because their daughters were being raped. And they were also survivors of child sex abuse. Remember I said about the revolving doors? So these are what I'm talking about. This is everywhere. You find a lot where the mothers and the daughters have gone through the same thing. And then this woman contacted me. She gave me a list. She said, this woman here is a school teacher. Her daughter was raped and she left. So when I first went up, I told people where I was going to go, and I met people, and these people told me all this stuff. And this school teacher said, well, my daughter was raped. I went to the police. I went to the local council. And this was a recurring theme. A lot of people were saying the same thing. And I thought, this is a huge cover-up. Everybody knew it was happening. And in 2023, they all had enough. And that was when they suddenly took to the street. And this huge riot, all of a sudden, 50 odd police officers turned up with riot gear, a helicopter, riot vans, and basically charged all the locals, and 7 got arrested. And while they're doing this, all the grooming gangs were allowed to escape. Nothing happened to the grooming gangs. None of them got arrested. What the hell is going on here? That's when I realised that's when this all came up. This is when this started. And I'm thinking, this is just the same thing that's been happening over and over and over. And this is not North Korea. This is not North Korea. This is Scotland. But this has been happening for years and years and years and years and years. And here I am right in the middle of it, getting all this information that I've wrote down here. I mean, I've got it here. I went into every hairdresser. I went in every pub. I went in every charity shop. I spoke with a fireman. I spoke with the wife of a fireman who knew the house he was attending was being used by gangs, and his own family had tried to warn the police. This is the fireman that was attending the actual fire. His own family had been trying to contact the police before to get this stopped. Also, a group of youngsters. I met these young kids. They came looking for me. I met these young kids. I got out of the hotel, walking across the road, and there's a group of about 10. Somebody says, "You Dave?" Oh, yeah. I met these, about 10 of them, all under the age of 20. Eight boys and 2 girls. And these guys started showing me the videos of the riot that they were in. And they were showing me the videos of the riots, and they're saying, and it wasn't a trophy. I've never ever seen this in my life. They weren't going, "Yeah, I was there and I threw this and I did this and we beat up." None of that. These kids were angry. These kids said to me, "We told the police, we warned the police, we begged the police to stop this, and they wouldn't listen." And then more and more of our family were dying, drug overdosing, setting fireworks to the kids. What else could they do? They couldn't do anything else. And these kids are standing there angry, not showing off like normal kids would do if they've been involved in a riot. And I thought, this is just something different altogether. This is, and that's when I decided I'm going to come back up here. So I went home, back down to England where I live, and I decided, and I said, right, I've got all these banners that I did about 2 months ago. You know, the one with the video with the bagpipes. When I did them, Emma, I did those banners about 3 months ago, right? Scotland, don't turn your back on your women and your girls. And the other one was Survivors United, we never give up. And the other one was Whistleblowers United. When I did those banners, Emma, I had no idea what I was planning. I just knew God had something planned for me. And I knew these banners were going to be used then. I had no idea. I didn't know. I didn't have a specific campaign in mind. Whistleblowers United, that's going to mean something. Yeah, I can see where that's going. And obviously we're hearing more and more stories about women and children getting raped in Scotland, and more it's immigrants, and more it's being silenced, and more the voices of Scotland are coming together, but they're not in unity. It's up to us, the survivors. We're the ones that are going to do it, because, and I don't mean be disrespectful to the people of Scotland, but they don't know how to deal with the issue. They just don't know what to do, because they've been silenced for decades. And that's when I decided I'm going to go myself, get some friends. So I contacted some survivors in England, some very famous survivors in England, survivors of Telford, survivors of Liverpool. And I got a lovely woman who said, I would like to come up. And she was a Hindu from London, a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful soul. So I had a white English woman from Liverpool, I had a Pakistani lady from Telford, and I had a Hindu lady from London. All came up in the car. They had a bit of a car accident, but they got there in the end. And then I had my friends, John and a couple others. So we stood outside the church and we did the campaign. We got a piper to come. The piper played, and people started coming up and telling us the stories. The amount of people who told us about the boys' abuse, and people who were coming up, with a lot of Christians coming up telling us that how dark this area was historically. And I kind of got that. I felt that, yeah. I did feel that, but my overall feelings for the people of the area outweighed the darkness feelings I had. Does that make sense? Yeah. And 2 days we stood, and we probably spoke to 20 or 30 survivors. No politicians came, none. Although I invited dozens and dozens, none came, which is what we expected. And yeah, and then I got home. And I wrote the tweet. I don't know if you've seen the tweet I wrote about just what I told you. I did a tweet about it, and it just went bananas. It went bananas. Over 1,000 likes. I couldn't even have a bath, because I like to play my music in the bath with the Bluetooth speaker, and because my Bluetooth speaker was going beep, 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 so I couldn't play any songs because I wouldn't know what they're playing. So then all of a sudden, I've got 2 politicians contacted me. Oh, sorry, I didn't come. I was a bit busy. Can I get in touch with you this week? I said, yeah. And then this other one contacted me. She phoned me this morning, and she says, I want to meet you. So I spoke to her and I told her everything that happened, and she says, everything you're saying is true. Everything you're saying is true. And you're the first person that's come out and actually spoke about it. and I want to arrange a meeting with you and my team. Or what did she say? She wanted to arrange a meeting, a team meeting, sorry. She wants to arrange, I don't know what that means. She wants to arrange a team meeting this week. So I'll probably have to go back up to Scotland again. And what I've got here, Emma, is powerful. What I've got here is evidence of serious cover-ups within the Scottish Government, which we have known has existed for years and years and years. People are saying to me again what they said before. Dave, you've got to be careful. You've got to watch your back. Make sure you've got an escape route in your flat. You know, things like this, because the police are going to come champing your door again. You know, but once I spoke to this MP this morning, I felt a great relief. Now people know, and again on Twitter you get the racist marks, they're F and F and the swearing and all the rest of it. So I've kind of managed to jump over that and kind of stick to the facts. And what I've found here is unbelievable. It's just, if you imagine a whole town. I mean, we in England, we used to have a program called Tales of the Unexpected. I don't think you would know it. Just bizarre stories, and this is like a bizarre story, but it's just an ugly one. It's a sick one, and it's one that's going to be told, and it will be told, I promise you. If we need to stand outside the Parliament, we will. But this story has to be heard, and it's not about Dave Sharp. It's about these women and girls. Because what we have to understand now, Emma, is if they're all calling for this inquiry, so we're calling for an inquiry in Scotland, what you have to understand is 40%, between 40 and 50%, probably higher, of all prostitutes, sex workers in Scotland, women, were all sexually abused as children. And most of them ended up in addiction, crime and prison. So we're not going to you can't have an inquiry now unless you show some way that you're going to protect these women coming forward, because you've already, the government, you've already put them in, you've called them liars, you've discredited them. So I'm saying to these MPs, let's get in a room together, let's work together and make sure this never ever happens again. We've got to protect these women coming forward. Amen.
Yes. Amen to that. Yes, that's one of the biggest problems. You know, lots of crime victims, if it's not abuse related, if somebody was on a murder scene and is going to give evidence, if there's another important case that doesn't have to do with child sexual abuse, many whistleblowers get protection through disclosure when they're going to be testifying in court or bringing a case forward. Survivors, however, that's never existed for them. They have the most important information, names, locations, abuse types, dates that these events are happening, where it's happening, what institutions, who's involved. And then they put their lives on the line to do that, and they walk away with a target on their back. They're not helped. There's no justice that's being served. Their stories are buried. That information's out there though, because it left their mouth. And now because they disclose, they put themselves in danger and there's no protection for them whatsoever. And so society can scream all they want, name names. There's thousands of names out there and nothing's been done about them. Like, we need to be able to give survivors a platform of safety in a way that they can feel protected coming forward with that information. Because you've said it yourself, you know, how many survivors have lost their lives, whether to, you know, being murdered or taking their own life because they disclosed and somebody wasn't happy with it. And now they're being targeted, they're being threatened, they're having their livelihoods taken away from them, they're constantly terrified, you know, and worse. And so if we're not offering some sort of protection or safety to these whistleblowers coming forward, how can we blame survivors for keeping their secrets inside? You know, that's a terrifying thing to ask somebody to do. And of course, people like you who are coming out and doing it, you're offering corroboration. You know, you're offering ways to do it where you yourself are not out here always just naming names. It's always about, you know, the information and about survivors. Like, there are ways that we can get the information out. But if we want this to stop, we do need to offer a platform where names can be disclosed and where we can hone in who's doing this. But people don't realize that survivors are literally, you know, the only crime victims that don't get protection for what they've witnessed and testify coming forward.
You know, when we're using language such as reconciliation and offering a truce, what does that mean? What we're saying is, we know for a fact there isn't one single MP who didn't know about this over the last 10, 15 years, right? So we're saying, yeah, we'll offer you truths. We're not out to harm you. We're out to protect the women. There's a difference. You didn't do your job right. You didn't do your job right 10 years ago. Now we're offering you the chance to work with you to make you do your job better.
Exactly.
I did it.
Yeah.
I did a campaign about 10 years ago up in Dundee in Scotland. I did a campaign and it was called "Come Forward, Be Brave, Don't Take Your Abuse to the Grave." And I did a big banner. I sat it in the city centre, and lots of people came forward and gave their testimonies. And I think I'm going to take the same banner back out again and sort of stand outside the Scottish Parliament and just to say to these women, like, come forward, be brave, don't take your abuse to the grave. And then you're turning around to the politicians and saying, you need to work with us. So we're kind of like the man in the middle, offering hope to the survivors, but also turning around to the politicians and saying, this is your last chance. You need to come out and be seen to be heard and forget your politics. Let's start putting our women and children first. Amen.
Amen. And that has to be so powerful that you're out there advocating that and spreading that message, around so other people can feel empowered and spread it as well, and I think it's amazing, your advocacy work. I know you've done a lot in recent weeks that I want to hear more about too, of course, but just hearing how far back your advocacy goes, that you've been traveling all over the UK and especially Scotland, meeting survivors, sitting with them, getting testimony, exploring different, cultures and seeing where this abuse is taking place and who's doing it. It's just really amazing, hearing about your journey and that you're finding new ways to get this information out, that you're creating banners with these really powerful messages and, you're following these instincts that you have. So I feel like it started really slow. When you hear about all these years ago, you had a few survivors that would come out. Now it's like in droves. You're getting 50, 30 people coming out at a time. You're getting recognition from people, and you're getting more and more support and more people coming forward and more people feeling the strength of, okay, well, authority's not going to protect me, and I know that, but I have a community now. I'm not alone. There's Dave out there, and he's getting other people together just like me. Other people understand my abuse, and so I can join a community even if I'm not 100% safe. I know I'm not alone, and that can just give so many people hope, even if they still have to be silent about their story. You're providing hope to people. You're providing a safe space for people to share their testimony, a place where people can feel like they're not the only ones carrying that heavy burden of abuse, and it's just really beautiful. I just want to thank you on behalf of, all survivors, and especially in your country, for all the work that you're doing, Dave. It's remarkable that everything that you risk and all the time that you spend away from home and, almost homeless yourself in some of these instances, going out and just being on the street for days and days. It's remarkable and incredible what you've risked and all the sacrifice that you've made for others. It's so honorable and amazing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. I lie in my bed each night. I lie in my bed and I feel this anointing. I feel God pouring his love into me. Sometimes I have to get up during the night and have a drink of water because I feel he's filling me too much with anointing, and I don't know what's going to come next. Sometimes in that moment, which is very rare, when I've got nothing in my head about worrying about something or planning a campaign, and I kind of sit back and I think, right, you've got a beautiful house, you've got no debt, you've got all these tools and these gadgets and televisions and computers and your stereo and I've got an air fryer, which is my new girlfriend. Yeah, I mean, I fell in love with an air fryer because I never had. I haven't bought potatoes for years. Now I'm actually cooking proper dinners, which is just fantastic. But then all of a sudden something happens. It might be something in the paper. It might be a phone call. It might be something, and I don't know. Something happens. It's as if God says, "Go out and tell the world to put my children first." It's magical. It feels great, and it's I wish I'd learned to drive earlier. Yeah, that's my next campaign. for the trains to have internet on them, because the trains have got no internet. It's supposed to be there, but it isn't. Anyway, that's another story. But yeah, it's child abuse is always going to be around. It's always going to be there. But again, I refuse with all my heart to even think that we are not a small enough country that we can actually make Scotland the safest country in the world. You know, we're such a small country, and it would be so simple, and it would save us so much money, and it would make us, you know, just bring us closer together. But again, it's the one subject, Emma, that just seems to divide a whole nation every time, eh? Because people have become so obsessed with power.
Yes.
You know, and I look at the Proverbs 28. You know, when a nation is not in control, chaos and anarchy prevails, and that's what's happened. That's what's happened in our country. It's we've got a government that's in chaos, and just covering up so many lies. You know, we've had it with the COVID inquiry. We've had it with the, I don't know if you're aware of the post office inquiry.
No.
We've had the post office. They put a system in the post offices years ago. This Japanese computer system, and it didn't work right, and it made all these people look like they'd been stealing money, and a lot of people got put in prison. A lot of things. It was very, very big, but they had an inquiry and they found that a lot of people were silenced and put in prison. And the same with, we've had certain hospital inquiries where the same things happened. The child abuse inquiry is a good example where people were silenced, and you sit and think, you go, not your children, not child abuse survivors, please. We don't deserve this. You know, and nobody deserves to be gaslighted and put in prison falsely. But you think, have we really gone that low that you know, so many people would rather see children suffer than make sure their mortgage is paid for? Are we really that bad now? You know, is it really that difficult to find people that are actually on our side? If you look at the people who have threatened me, I'm talking about people who are the main speakers at conferences in Scotland for childhood trauma. And you're thinking, how's they people got so much power? What on earth is going on here? You know, it's so strange. And then I kind of go on podcasts like yourself and sort of other podcasts, and you hear in America where this is it's becoming an everyday conversation. We use people are more and more talking about this, and I learn more. I learn more listening to American podcasts and stuff. But then again, when I come on here in Britain, you know, when I often think about the drugs that was used to drug us. And you hear now about these, like I said, these kids were all getting drugged. We know what drugs they're using, right? But I'd like to know what drugs they used in the 60s and 70s to put us to sleep for so long, when they put us in these coffins, and, you know, to have a 3-year gap in my brain. That's something I've always wanted to know about, you know. Even the whole psychodynamics of childhood trauma, and how in Scotland especially, that there is no treatment, there is no centres, there's no discussions, nothing like this is ever talked about. And when I first came forward, it took me 40 years to find people who'd been through the same as me, and kind of 60 odd men came forward. I'm the only one left. There is a couple of stories that I have to live with. I remember one case, a guy called me. He told me he'd been through the exact same things as me, and he had a wife and 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters. And I said to him, go to the police. And he went to the police. He was in the police for so many hours. He walked out the police station, went home, went upstairs and hung himself.
Oh.
And I have to live with that. I've got to live with that. And so many other men just disappeared because something happened between going to the police and going to court or going to the child abuse inquiry. When the child abuse inquiry covered the home I was in, they only I think it was something like 20 or 25 men came forward. But we know over 50. I sent over 50 people, but the child abuse inquiry was cutting it down and using the ones that would be less effective. So the people that knew less So anybody who knew, like myself, who was in St. Ninians, who was abused by a certain individual, who was part of a certain paedophile nationwide, you didn't have him. You didn't want him in the inquiry. You understand?
Yeah.
So what we have now, Emma, is when you look at the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry website, when you look at the individual cases and reports, it's not what's in them, it's what's not in them. And that reveals it's like a confession of guilt for all the cover-ups. And I get survivors and campaigners from Australia, Ireland, Northern Ireland, who phone me and say, Dave, I've just gone through this report. This isn't right. I said, of course, it isn't right. We know it. But not a word from ND in Scotland. Nobody's interested. Nobody wants to talk about it. And it's like I said to you before, I say this phrase all the time, and I use this phrase all the time. All over the world now, people are coming forward, as you know. Survivors from all over the world, especially clergy abuse, are coming forward. Lights are coming on across the globe, and the more lights that come on, the more people are turning to Scotland and asking, why is it still so dark? Why do we still have so many people in prison? Yeah.
Yeah, and we've talked about that on a couple episodes, how interconnected all of this is. So it's not just that we can identify different institutions, different individuals, different groups of people, but one of the things that you've been able to really hone in and kind of weave together this tapestry of is how it's all connected. And you can see how these things work together. You know, the courts work with the government, which works with the church, which works with the care system and the care homes, which works with the orphanages, you know, and so you see, and then you also see, you know, how this goes on the streets, how child abuse then funnels the individuals that do get out into things like prostitution, drug addiction, the jails, the mental institutions.
Homelessness.
So it's like you see how they contain inside these institutions and then how they still have control over these survivors after they get out. They're just placed somewhere else, you know, and they're made to be criminal. They're made to look to be discredited, to look and be homeless, you know, and so then they don't get listened to even when they do get out. There's no help and no support. And I think that, you know, this is one of the most important things that people need to understand, you know, is that there's not, again, going back to safety and protection, you know, even when survivors get out, there's not therapists that are compassionate, that understand this topic. There's not, you know, mental health programs and institutions that are housing survivors and knowing how to treat them. It's sort of just, well, your abuse is over, you should just get over it and move on. There's no like treatment of care, how we would treat somebody who got out of the military or how we would treat somebody who had an accident and was physically injured. You know, we're not treating the emotional wounds of people the same that we do for physical wounds and, you know, wounds that are more heavily recognized, I guess, as far as current treatment options and what current medicine is treating. And so it's extremely sad, you know, and you've seen a lot of this firsthand, being homeless and talking to homeless, being in jail and talking to the criminals that are in there and understanding their stories, you know, people who are going through mental health issues. Where does that stem from? Addiction and drugs, you know, where does that stem from? And it all comes back. The root of all of it is child abuse, you know, ritualistic child abuse and the cover-ups, you know, and then the lack of care for the survivors whenever they finally have the courage to leave those institutions, or you know, when they get funneled out, they're just funneled back in a different way, which is really, really sad.
And what also happens, let's not forget the criminal justice system.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And what happens, Emma, we have this process in Scotland where when the young kid comes out the care system, and I write a lot about this on Twitter, when the young kid like myself comes out of the care system and he reaches out for help and he goes to his GP, his doctor, and he's put straight onto prescribed medication. And then he realises that the prescribed medication is not taking away the horrors of his nightmares. So he goes back to the doctor and he says, listen, I don't want these drugs because they're not working. And the doctor just gives him a heavier dosage. And then what he does is he then becomes addicted to harder drugs because he can't find the level of peace that he's looking for. So he tries something else. then very quickly becomes an addict, and then to feed his addict, he gets into trouble, and then he gets caught by the police, and he goes in the police station, and he says to the police, listen, I'm a survivor of child sex abuse. I didn't mean to do this. And the police officer says, I'm not interested in any of your past. You've got to take responsibility for your actions. And then you go to court, he gets your lawyer, and you go to see the lawyer, and the lawyer says the same thing. Just plead guilty, you'll get a fine, you'll be fine. So then you go to court, you get a fine. Now you're a criminal. Now your life's changed. Now you become a social misfit and a social outcast. Now you don't know anywhere to turn, so you've got to rely on your own instincts and depend on yourself, expected to move forward when your whole past is dragging you back. So then you commit another crime. Then you get bail. Then you commit another crime. Eventually, you commit a crime and you go to the court and the judge says to you, we don't need people like you in our society. People like you need to be locked up. So you get sent to prison. And then what happens is you end up in prison, you meet all the same people, but you learn new skills on how to survive. Because these people are going through the same, but they're all at different age levels. And then what happens is when you come out, you very quickly go from being a young child committing minor crimes, and very quickly you enter, when you go to a lawyer, you're no longer known as Dave, the child abuse survivor. You're now known as Dave, the serial convict, who's a repeat offender, who's now committing far serious crimes. And then you're fitted into this justice system where they take you, they put on, they scroll over child sex abuse survivor. So now you're no longer a child sex abuse survivor. You're now a serial criminal. And then you're on this path where some people spend their whole lives. Now, if we go back and look, and I've said this to you before again as well, if you go back and look at these lawyers and actually ask them the question, did that person, that young person, reveal child sex abuse to you? And if he did, what did you do about it? Did you refer him for help, or did you just rush him through the criminal justice system? And that's what happens. They just rush through, because nobody wants to hear the difficult to hear stories. And if you dare mention satanic ritual abuse, you're in big trouble. That's why so many people disappear. This is where I feel so privileged. I've got this power given to me to keep this story alive. It's there's this dark world that nobody knows about, that you and I know about, that exists. And even this week, a woman came over, Morag, beautiful Christian woman, and she said to me, she says, this whole area's dark, Dave. This whole area's got a whole satanic ritual past. And I said, well, we know the whole of Scotland has. It's just that we just can't get enough people to come forward to talk about it.
100%. And you're so right about all of that, and one example that, I just want to bring up in honor. This month will be a whole year since Kevin Sutherland took his life. And he was the perfect example of exactly what you said. Somebody just being run around the system, being criminalized left and right, even for doing good. He was penalized even for, as a young kind of, older teen, young adult, going online and trying to hunt down pedophiles, and was criminalized for trying to do something good with the anger and the hopelessness that he had. He tried to get justice in the little ways that he could and to try to help, and you see just how the system fails them, right down to the child abuse inquiry that you guys have in the UK. There's not even safety and protection for the witnesses that disclose there. They're blasted online with no hope of their testimony being privatized if it goes online, and just to see how the system treats survivors, who are just so hopeless and like just looking for somebody to listen and somebody to help, and the helplessness that is just so rampant, in your country. And like you said, the authorities know. There's been tons of survivors that have gone to, for just one example, the child abuse inquiry. They housed so many testimonies. And like what's been done, they just have a whole database of names and locations and testimony that they're not pursuing, they're not corroborating, they're not helping anybody with that information except themselves. They're furthering the cover up and corroborating with these different institutions around them to continue the cover up and to continue, brutalizing the survivors who have the courage to come forward, to try to get justice. And it's just absolutely horrific how they treat survivors, where if that same person, if Kevin wasn't a survivor and had went through some of his trials and tribulations, he would not have been treated the way that he was as an abuse survivor, and it just compounds the trauma and abuse as they're struggling to try to just find some sort of humanity in the world, try to find his footing and his way and some purpose in this life that has just been so cruel to him. And to see just the brutality of authorities to survivors, there's not only a lack of help, but there's that secondary abuse. There's the gaslighting and the lack of care just from the people that could help. It just takes one person to step up and to care, and to see just over and over again how the system fails survivors. It's horrific. It's so sad, how many lives are lost every year. Oh,
yeah. Kevin's a great example because he was a guy who had to leave Scotland, like me. He had to leave Scotland to find his potential. And he went to London and he turned into this pantomime character and he became almost famous. He knew people in the X Factor. And even after the successes in his life, and he did have them, he went on to be a fantastic actor. But even then, when he came back to Scotland, they were just so intent on demonizing his past, which was just so, same as me. They did the same to me. I didn't want my name mentioned for other reasons because by that point I'd realised this was all one cover up. They were trying to cover up us getting taken over to Ireland. So it was the same thing. They were just desperate to demonise us. But Kevin Sutherland's a perfect example of, and still nobody knows where he went. Never been the case has never been opened again. There's a family there completely broken, lost, no answers. And this is the way it's been for decades, story after story after story, as you're picking up. It's and again, like I said earlier on, sometimes I sit here and I think, right, just relax. Don't look at the computer. Don't look at the newspaper. Don't go on Twitter. But again, it's now with this thing in Britain with the grooming gangs and the illegal immigrants, excuse me, we're hearing of a rape almost every day now. So it's very, very hard to ignore it. It's and it's young children, and more times than not, you're finding it's been covered up. And then not just me, I'm not saying this is just me, but when I suddenly wake up and I'm getting a tweet from somebody who's been following me for years, and suddenly they say, Dave, I'm too scared to leave my house. I'm too scared to go into the city. I think, what the hell's going on? What on earth is happening? And what can I do? And then you start thinking, that's why what I said with these banners, what I would like to see, what I did with these banners is, it came together and I looked at it, Whistleblowers United, Survivors United, Protect Your Women. This is about going into these places where I went and saying to the community, come out, be the voice, have your voice heard, create your own whistleblowers groups, look for people who have been silenced and discredited, be your own strength in your own community, because at the moment you're all being silenced and but this town, as I say, when I went there, it was like some sort of Alfred Hitchcock thing, just these people at night time, they were in the pubs, they were drinking, they were dancing. It was like one big family. It was like being in somebody's house. They were so close to each other, so everybody knew everybody, and even when they were dancing, people were coming up and shaking my hand. They didn't even know me. I was a stranger. It was just such a weird feeling. But then you're thinking, and especially when you're looking back, some of these people are carrying trauma that even their next door neighbours doesn't know about. This thing that happened in Scotland, and then you're saying, is this happening in every town and city? And then again, you go back to the point where I said about in 2016, when the police had the opportunity to come out and say, right, we're going to stop this. And what I've heard since is that with these big cases, the government, the establishment, did a fantastic job of keeping this silence. And what we find is from 2016 onwards, the bookkeeping, the data stopped. So they even stopped collecting the data on these grooming gangs, to the point now where it's hard to find anything unless you know where you're looking for. You go into these police, I go deep into the police websites and found all these different cases and what they're doing next. And you hear about these massive, massive amounts of drugs and money being made. And then you're thinking, hang on a minute, where does this relate to the drug deaths? Why is this never mentioned with the drug deaths? So then you think about it, you're going to silence the grooming gangs. In order to silence the grooming gangs, you've got to silence the crimes. Then in order to silence the crimes, you have to silence the deaths and the suicides and the drug deaths. Then you get the bigger picture. You think, my God. And that's what I've just did. That's what I've gone into this town and exposed a whole series of cover-ups, all in the sake of to keep an ethnicity quiet. But here's the thing, we also know, having said that, and I met lots of people last week who talked about white grooming gangs. We can't forget that, Emma. We can't forget that. And again, we're talking about the main thing we want out of this NU inquiry is it all has to start from the care system. You can't just go out looking for Asian grooming gangs or Bulgarian grooming gangs or Romanian grooming gangs. In my opinion, you need to look at the care system and start there, close it down in the sense of secure it safely to protect our kids, and then start working out who the grooming gangs are. We all know who they are. Everybody knows. It's not difficult to find out who and where they are. It just takes one or two decent, heartfelt police officers on our side. Even when I was in prison, sometimes when I was in prison, I was only there for 30 days. Sometimes my door would go and a guy would come in and say, can you come with me a minute? I've got to interview you. Make sure your mental health's okay, right? So he would take me in a room, and then all of a sudden this guy would change. He said, see all the stuff you tell us? We've been talking about this, and we know it's been happening, and we know that we're being silenced in here. And he says, see, if you ever go to court for your case, if you ever get a chance to go to court and prove your innocence for these false allegations, I know two police ex-prison officers who would gladly come to your court case and stand up for you. Yeah. So there's two men, one for definite, and I met this guy, and he said to me, he's a retired prison officer, and he says, if you ever go to court, he said, the people, the charity that did this to you, I know a few stories about them with people who've been put in prison, just like me. Again, this is the revolving doors. So again, when you're talking about how do we change the system, we're talking about these charities that are putting, it takes so much for these men and women to come forward, and you know yourself, Emma, when a survivor comes forward, if that person they're coming forward to, if that doesn't work, there's only one way for the survivor to go, and that's down.
Yes.
Anywhere in the world, that's the truth. If you don't have the correct safety nets. So what we're talking about, what I'm talking about, and this is my, call me naive, it might already be happening, I don't know. One of the things I was saying about, if you had all these child abuse charities and you made them all work together, then you would, and if a survivor came in and said, my name's Mary, my mother died when I was born, I've been in domestic relationships, abusive relationships, I'm an addict, I've been in prison, I want to do this is what I want in my life, and a charity can say, we can provide most of that, but if we can't help you, there's another charity that we work with, and we can make sure that you don't go backwards. Now, what would this do? This would automatically seek out find all the rotten ones, all the ones that are doing wrong, and throwing these survivors out. All of a sudden, they'd be more scrutinised, and they would realise they have to do the job properly. So there you would see a massive difference. And again, if you look at these lawyers who are doing this to the kids, prison population would half. It would half. If you're talking about early prison release, right? If you're talking about early prison and they're letting rapists go, they're letting all sorts of monsters releasing them. If you set up a system where all these men and women that have been in prison for all these years, in and out, and you said, right, we're going to make sure we get you the proper counselling, we're going to reunite with your family, we'll get you in a safe accommodation, we'll get you on a path to recovery, and we'll get you on the path to work again, the prison population would half. It would half. But they're releasing the people they're releasing are just going out committing more crimes.
Yeah.
The reason these people are in prison, because they've never found that one safe space where they can feel safe enough to open up the old wounds and talk about these wounds buried deep, because the system's set up to fail them.
100%. Yep. And you got to see that firsthand. This isn't just you speculating that. And it's true all around the world, not just in Scotland, not just in the UK. This is true in America. You know, if we actually did the statistics on patients in mental health, in the mental health sphere, whether that's in, you know, a home or somebody who's been admitted, if we looked at drug addicts, if we looked at, you know, prostitutes and people who are sex workers, if we looked in jails, if we looked at homeless, if we actually took the statistics on how many of these individuals that we criminalize and demonize, and of how many are child sexual abuse survivors, I think we'd all be on our knees just crying, you know, wanting to help these people. But because we've been really lied to about who they are, you know, they want us to focus on the addiction and to criminalize them for that. They want us to focus on the crime. They never want us to focus on the root of the problem, you know.
Yeah. You've just froze. You still there? I've lost your signal. I'm okay, and the clock is still ticking, but you froze for a second. I don't know if you can hear me. I'll just keep talking while you're frozen. Hope you can come back in. Again, if you're talking about prison and the criminal justice system, excuse me, let's look at the Bible, right? Let's look at the criminal justice Bible as they see it, right? We and it's probably the same all over the world again, right? We've got a system in place where anybody in a position of power, anybody can make their way up to a position of power. Narcissists, rapists, the scum of the earth, right? And they can do something to somebody in the way of maybe a false allegation or something like that, or kick them out, they end up on the streets. They've got all this power, right? Now, if somebody tries to fight back, I read it, I seen one just recently. Somebody made false allegations against somebody, and the person made a complaint 3 times to the police. And on the 3rd time, the police wrote back and said, if you don't stop, and then all of a sudden, the police wrote back and said, if you don't leave this alone, we're going to charge you with stalking. So the person had a false allegation made against them, and then they tried the person who did it to respond, and the person didn't. They then went to the police, and the police contacted the victim and said, in the law, does that fit in? Where is, if somebody in a position of power, if you've got somebody that's the chief executive of a child abuse charity, makes an accusation against somebody who's a child sex abuse survivor, a false allegation of assault like mine, right? The system's set up, if you ask 1,000 people, bar none, you ask 1,000 people, if this person who's made their way to the chief executive position of a charity, and you've got this person here, a man who spent 16 years in the care system, been sexually abused, turned to drugs, been an addict all his life, in and out of prison, in and out of mental hospitals, his wife died, pregnant wife died, but although he hasn't been in any trouble for 30 years, who would believe the CAO and who would believe the victim or the client? Every single person would believe the CEO, right? Everybody would.
Everybody.
So if you had a system in place that balanced the books. So if somebody works for a charity or a social worker, whatever, if one of these persons makes these accusations against someone who's carrying this trauma, surely there should be a law that says, if we're going to judge this person as the criminal, before we do that, we should at least look at the history of this person to balance the books out. So if you're making an accusation against somebody, we need to make sure that you're properly vetted as well. That way you would balance it, and you would see, again, you would see prisons half. But at the moment, the system's set up to fail the victim every time, the survivor. We've got no laws. We've got no rights at all. You just, trauma is a crime. That's what they say. Trauma is a crime.
Amen, Dave. I wanted to ask you, with all the traveling that you've done, you mentioned, and of course you don't have to give names and specifics, but what were some of the other revelations that you were even shocked to learn in your most recent travels? Did you come across any testimonies or any type of information that was really new to you that you're now able to add into the puzzle that you've been putting together the last 30 years?
First of all, as I say, it was a very dark area. I went up all the way to the west coast. I went to Dumfries, which is on the border, up to I stayed mainly in Ayrshire, and to find that even, I've never heard this before. I find it utterly shocking that an undertaker who in 2018 he started his own charity, which is called, where is it? It's called Release Ayrshire. Now, this is a charity he set up for boys that feel suicidal, okay? Because he didn't see enough being done in the area. So he's, not only is an undertaker, he set up his own counselling service to help young boys, men, from committing suicide. And he knows all the stigmas related to child abuse and drugs, and how in Scotland everybody has to be macho. And when it comes to child sex abuse, we don't talk about that. To then have this guy to be in a situation where the drug epidemic, the overdoses and the suicides are so high, he feels he needs to raise it with the council and the police, and nothing happens. Really? I'm laughing, but staggering to see that there's such level that this is happening to. I mean, I've not met the guy yet. I know apparently he wants to talk to me. He's desperate to talk to me, but I just can't. He's got my number. Maybe he's too busy or something like that. I don't know. But I mean, that was one of the things that shocked me more than anything else. But also, even the charities we went to, and I went to one or two, I won't mention them, but even they were kind of like, didn't want to get involved. And again, it's, to answer your question, it seems that this smokescreen, this fear that's existed in Scotland for decades, with the Catholic Church predominantly, it seems that fear has only got worse. And again, they marry that up with when I often get asked the question, being out of the system 50 years, has anything really changed since you left the care system, Dave? And the answer is, it's actually worse. It's actually worse. It feels like nobody actually cares about the children of Scotland. There's no evidence. You know, I wish I could say to you, you know, that you know, when you say, did anything stick out? That's the biggest thing that stuck out, is the fact that nothing's actually changed. We've got this child sex exploitation thing going on across the globe, which has been happening now, as you know, forever. And as I said earlier, it's just such big business now, Emma. Did I tell you the story when I was in London with the little girl in the tubeway? Did I tell you that story?
Mm-mm.
This was when the Archbishop of Canterbury resigned. Yeah, you remember the Archbishop of Canterbury? When he resigned, I went down to Canterbury. I did a vigil outside the Canterbury Cathedral. End all clergy abuse now, with my big banner. And I was coming home, so I had to get the train from Canterbury to London. I got on the subway at Paddington Street Station, and I'm going from Paddington Street Station up to Euston Station in the underground. And I've got off the train, and the crowd's all tight, really, really, really tight. And I'm walking up, and I'm near the top. I can see the top, and all of a sudden I looked round like this, and I saw a little girl just sitting there. And this will never leave me. This will never leave me. I saw this little girl, 12 or 13 years of age, dirty blonde hair. She looked thin. She looked like she was on drugs. She wasn't right. Just didn't look pale. And her eyes, I just caught her eyes, and it was like I was fixed. And I went to go over, and I was pushing through all the crowd. And as I got this far away, a man and a woman came over, and they said to me, "You pay, you pay."
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
that's the London Underground. That's the underground. That's
Oh,
the underground. Where's the cameras? Where's the police? And I've still got that in my head. I've still got that. And then the crowd took me away, and I'm looking around, but I'm caught in the crowd, and I lost it. Just for that moment, I was like, wow, wow. And again, I go to the places when I was 16 years of age. You go in London, and this is a common sight. It's a common sight. You
just
know,
right on the
it's
street, right in public.
sorry.
I said just right on the street, right in public, nobody doing anything about it.
Nobody's doing anything about it. Everybody's. You can't even say go on their own business. It's just everybody's turning away, Emma. Too many people are turning away. That's the truth. And these vipers, I don't know what word to use. I was going to say SCUM, but I don't swear. I don't know if that's a swear word or not. But these evil people that take every single little bit of opportunity you give them to grab the moment and grab what they can. It's just it's the vipers. They're evil, and it's we know that this satanic thing is getting worse. We know that there's certain groups of people that will. I heard somewhere recently that and you'll know this a lot more than me, that they're grabbing women now, and there's these kind of factories where they get these girls pregnant to produce babies to give to these Satanists who put them on the altar and slay them, because they have to have something pure in order to seek purity within themselves. What on earth kind of religion's that? What is that? And I know, because I've heard you talk about these kind of things. What kind of religion's that, for God's sake?
Yeah, it's like they have these breeding facilities. They treat humans like animals, and animals shouldn't even be treated this way, but it's the same concept. If they want to breed and have a whole farm of pigs or cows to mass distribute meat to the masses, they're doing the same thing for these satanic cults with these very privatized breeding centers that are off books. They're not public. And they're literally just, using women to breed them and to hand these babies off to these Satanists. You're absolutely right. It's horrific. Horrific.
So where does your what am I looking for? What am I trying to say? I'm not John Rambo, right? I'm not Rambo, and I'm not God, and I'm not Jesus, and I'm not saying love me, I'm great. But where do you draw the line between what you can do and what you can't do? We know we can't save the world. We know that. We know we can't save the world. But even just going up to Scotland and just looking what I did, just for 6 days, going in different towns, talking to the people, as I say, going into hairdressers, going into charity shops, going in a fire station, going around asking all these questions, and you find such a huge thing that's happened, and you're saying, are we really in a position now where nobody cares? Or is everybody threatened? Are we all being threatened? Because if we are, I refuse to be. I don't care. I've got the armour of God on me, and I will stand and fight. I don't care how big you are. I don't care how big your gang is. I don't care who you stand in the name of. We will. God's children will come, and we will defend our children at all costs. At all costs. There's nothing scares me. Nothing. I don't care what this world, what's going to happen. I do worry, Emma, that the time, because I've seen twice now. I've seen in the last couple of months. Twice I've been in town and seen like serious assaults, fighting, just random attacks, and I'm saying to myself, I hope the time doesn't come, or it may very well come to us all, when you get in a situation where if you see an old lady getting attacked, you're going to have to step in, and how much force you can use, or what am I, and as I say, I've dealt with my anger years ago. When I went through therapy for years about the child abuse and losing my wife, one of the things I was treated for more than anything else, apart from all the psychotic damage, was my anger. So I learned to, and now it troubles me that I wish I could get angry sometimes, but I can't. But I wonder, I fear a lot about getting in that position where you may just be going out to buy a pint of milk, and you see this violence that's happening more and more around the world and on our streets. And at some point you're going to have to react, and I'm worried about that. That's what worries me, you know. But again, we, especially men, we have a moral responsibility to look after our women and children at any cost. You know, we do. We have to. You know, if we don't, then we're going to end up in a very, very bad scenario, a very bad world. So, yeah.
Now, answer me this. You've been all across Scotland, and especially, I mean, you've done it for decades. You've been traveling across your country and beyond, but really you've consolidated a big trip just in the last few weeks. Are the patterns that you see in your localized area in Scotland the same as a different city, as a different city, as a different city? Are you seeing overlap, the same exact things?
In homelessness terms, prison terms, it's the same everywhere. But again, it's the
all of it.
Yeah, I used to I was very, when I went to theology college, when I became born again, God says to me, "You need to slow down." He called me hyper haggis. That's my nickname, hyper haggis. He says, "You have to slow down, Dave. You're too quick to run and tell the world your story. I want you to go to theology college, and I want you to learn the Bible, and I want you to learn to understand when I want to speak to you, and when to slow down, and also to learn about God's timing." And that's what he did. I went to college, and at weekends I would go out to Inverness, Edinburgh, and I'd go on the streets and I'd meet people. And I found this thing in Scotland that happens more in England. It works better in England than it does in Scotland. And I started going out with street preachers and other organisations. And I found it when I went out and I met homeless people and I started speaking to them. And as soon as I started talking about the grooming process, about oral sex and things like this, I found that people would suddenly wake up and look at me, and they would suddenly go, "That's what happened to me. That's what I've been trying to tell people. That's what I'm too scared to talk about." And I said, "Well, there was a stage where I was a young child. I'd never been loved before. I never had a family. And this man groomed me into a way of loving him and doing things that made me feel good. And now I have to read my Bible every day, and I make sure I don't have any of these tendencies, dark tendencies." And the guy, suddenly these people would change. And it happened more in England, but when you do it in Scotland, you find that these people, most of them run away to England. So many tens of thousands of people run. But if we find a way of opening up better and actually talking about these things, that will change everything. Again, it's all about finding the way to help these people open their hearts to talk about these things, Emma. You know, I'm not sure if that's the right answer you were looking for.
Yeah, it is. You know, I think one of the misconceptions in society, because the network side and how this all goes together is not presented to the public. The public just gets these little news clippings: pedophile arrested and put away, and Epstein killed himself. We're all done with that. You know, we get these little like nice stories that are all tied up with a bow and taken care of. And I think people have a hard time recognizing that that's not just an isolated incident that happened in that area, that same exact thing is happening right in the neighboring city, in the neighboring state, in the neighboring country, you know, right in the neighboring community of your own community. And so that was sort of, and you did answer that, and it goes right down to the homelessness, to the drugs, all the way to the child abuse, that these same exact patterns overlap everywhere. It's not just in your city, and it wasn't just at your school that you went to, in your care home that you grew up in your orphanage and with your priests, these same exact patterns, these same exact types of rituals, these same exact types of abuses, these same exact types of predators are the same in every single, city. There's overlap. And then right down to the amount of homeless people that are survivors of this and still being victimized, the people in jail in different areas. It's the same exact patterning, and I think your research and your investigations, again, through personal experience, you've been able to demonstrate this in a physical manner, not just something you're speculating. This is something that you've seen firsthand from actually visiting different places and speaking to people on the streets.
Yeah, I went to a lot of cities in England. You won't know Bristol. Are you familiar with Bristol? It's off of central England. It's okay. Every area has its own culture. Bristol's a very cultured city, very mixed race and things like that. But I went there because I was really fascinated, and I'm getting really fascinated now by the whole fentanyl thing, the increase in fentanyl and how it's knocking people out. And I went there because I'd heard that it was one of the first places in England where it was hitting the homeless community really bad. And I went to two homeless charities, and in each one I went in, and I was talking about child sex abuse. And as soon as I started talking about they were very keen to talk to me about the fentanyl problem, how that affected people. And there's people homeless now who a year ago were working in a bank, or somebody who was, in the army. All kinds of all these people now are getting drawn to fentanyl. And as soon as I mentioned child sex abuse, all of a sudden, no, and I was kicked out. And it happens a lot. It really, really does. It really does happen a lot. Even though I've not got my wallet with me, even though I've got my business card, which says Dave Sharp, S.A.F.E, seek and find everyone abused in childhood, tells you what I am and who I am. It's got my phone number. And even then, I say, I'm just interested in the local community and what he's actually doing for survivors of child sex abuse. Everybody takes offence at that. They take offence because it's a cover, because they're not in most cases, especially in Scotland, most charities are told not to talk about it, and if you do, your funding will be affected by it. So people live in fear. So most of the charities, if you come across a charity that says its email address ends in gov, that means more than likely they've been funded by the government. So most of the ones that are funded by the government are silenced. If you talk about this, you lose your funding. So you try and look for other charities that are just sort of running off their own passion, whatever it is. And even there, you find it's very, very hard to find a charity. There is some there. I don't want to start criticising everybody. There is some good ones, and there is some good ones in Scotland as well. But it's very, very hard to find these people who, most of their services. I've walked into many homeless charities, homeless cafes, very big ones in Scotland, and I walk in as a client. Sometimes I'll dirty my hair, I'll go homeless for the night, and then I walk into the charity. I say, can I just ask you, how many staff do you have here trained to deal with and recognise people who were abused in childhood? Sorry, who are you? Why are you asking me these questions? Well, because I'm a survivor myself, and I just want to make sure that there's people here that are properly trained to recognise, or even maybe, do you have some leaflets that encourages people who were sexually abused to come forward to a chat? No, we don't deal with that. This is a homeless centre. We don't deal with things like that. Yeah, it's always the first thing I look for when I go into a homeless centre, any of these homeless charities. First thing you do is go to the brochures, where the brochures are, and see if there's any literature on child sex abuse. And you won't find it. It's not there. It's not there. And the number of times I'll be followed outside by somebody, one of the team leaders or managers, say, Dave, I'm glad you came in and spoke about this, because we're not allowed to talk about it. Yeah, it really is that big. And when you start to understand that, then you start to ask the bigger question: who, what, and who was it that actually put me in prison?
Exactly.
Was it just this charity? Because here's the thing: when the charity that did this to me, right? The question I ask all the time is, what in God's name would drive the chief executive of a child abuse charity to be so determined to criminalise one of our own clients? And then when you think of that question, then say to yourself, hang on a minute, there's a bigger question here. What government would allow a charity to be set up that would do this to someone who's carried so much trauma? Therein lies the big issue. It's a governmental thing, because none of the charities I'm talking about, they're not regulated. They run it on their own rules and regulations. And if you step out of line, they're going to knock you down, and they're going to criminalise you, and they're going to put you in prison. Did someone say North Korea?
Now, speaking of, I don't know if this is related at all. You had mentioned that you were discovering that there's white grooming gangs and that you're also discovering Asian grooming gangs. What's the significance of the Asian grooming gangs? Where are they coming from? And why is this happening to where they're being, they're terrorizing survivors in Scotland?
Well, when you look at the Pakistani gangs, when you actually, I mean, again, I'm the most non-race person I know anyway. But when you look at the history, some of the places where they come from, inter-family abuse is rife, so that they're brought up to believe that they can rape their own sisters and their own cousins. So children are commodities, sex objects, and they bring this culture over. That's just one example, but there's all these other cultures. But there again, when you even look at Romanians, it's very, very similar as well, where some of these guys are putting their own daughters and wives and nieces into the sex game. So if they're doing that to their own kind, you know, what are they doing to what they do? You know, if they pick up these young girls, they've got there's no respect. There's no, you know, they have no qualms about what they're doing, you know. And then when you relate that to the white grooming gangs, I've done it many, many times, Emma, many, many times when I've been stood, especially when I've been campaigning in Scotland, and someone will come over to me and say, and I'm just thinking in my head, 2 or 3 that I know personally, where they've been passed around, groomed by their own family, and passed around all the men in the family, from the father, the grandfather, the uncles, the cousins, and it's just, this is just a woman, it's a sex object, has been all her life for a whole generation after a generation, and that's the worst kind of trauma I can imagine. I can't imagine any worse trauma than that. I really can't think of anything worse than family abuse. And I've met so many women, you know, that you know, when I see a woman, and I know before she's even approached me, I look in her eyes, and I know, not all the time, I'm not saying I'm God or anything like that, but I know what's coming. You can tell, you know, you've done it yourself with your interviews. I've seen some of the people you interview and the way they look, you just know that the life they've had. Yeah.
Oh, that's horrific.
Yeah.
And you're right. The generational abuse too, because it'll start, you know, somebody has to start that chain, but each generation it grows. And so not only is it continuing, but you're involving more and more and more family members. So something that started small is now grown into, you know, many, many lineages and many, many family members, which is also really scary.
And so what happens when that lady or that woman goes to a help from a charity, and she walks into a charity where nobody's properly trained, and she's classed as high maintenance, and all of a sudden she's not getting the help that she thinks she needs or deserves, and then that clash starts, and that's an almighty fall. That's when you've no family to go back to, because it's all you're running away from them, and then you go into this place for help and it doesn't happen. That's a mighty fall. That's an awful. That's where your suicides and drug overdoses come in, Emma. And I will keep saying it. We're a small enough country. We can deal with this. We can deal with this. We need to have a national conversation, sit down, and how we start from the bare roots of children coming out of care especially, but all children who are sexually abused, you know, we can have a system in place where we have safety nets at every path, every corner, every junction, you know, to make sure that individual at least sees a light at the end of the tunnel. And if it sees that light at the end of the tunnel, then we have a system in place. I used to run a program called the Footsteps Project when I worked for a charity. And the Footsteps Project was just knowing somebody who's been sexually abused and knowing all the hiccups and the brick walls they're going to come up against. For example, they've been turned down for housing. They're no longer allowed to see their kids. They can't get a job. They're in addiction. Their finances are all out of place. And it's about saying to that place, like, let's start from the start. Let's look at and we had like a 12-month program. So the first 3 months of the year, you would concentrate on their addiction, getting them stable. The next 3 months, you would work about kindling the relationship with their family, getting the family stability back in place. Then the third 3 quarters, you'd look at a long-term homing and long-term employment. And then the final 3 months is a release program that helps them get back into work temporarily and actually earning their own money, coming off the system, and then getting back into a life of employment, family, and again, a long future. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. So I did that voluntarily for about 7 years. So, and again, I was working with the right people with the right heart. And there is a lot of people out there that have got good hearts. Yeah.
What other solutions have you thought up? I know it's such a big thing to think about how we just eradicate all of this, you know, but starting with a small country, I feel like Scotland could be a model for other countries to follow if they were to implement some of these things. What other solutions, if you could just not have any restrictions and not have any barriers, what else needs to be done in order to provide the protection and healing for survivors and victims?
That's a big question.
That's a big question.
That's a big question. I wouldn't even claim. I mean, I wouldn't even claim to have the answer to that. You know, I always say that the one thought that always comes into my head for years and years and years and years. Scotland was always known as a country that put its children first, and something happened. I don't know. Something happened, and we lost that. You know, if we can go back to putting our children first, and you know, picking your children up at school, you know, doing things at night time, family things. I don't know. It's I've never had a family. You know, I can only dream of what it would look like. But God, I wish I had the answer to that one, Emma. I wish I had the answer. It's you know, even there was a system in place not long ago with the Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. I'm sure you've heard of her. And she had this 50 million pot that she was throwing about, and she was telling people, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, and we're going to end homelessness, we're going to end addiction and all this. And everybody was sort of looking around, all these charities and organisations were like, well, give me some, give me some, give me some. And then what happened is that somehow the Glasgow especially was flooded with all this volunteers. There was loads of volunteers everywhere. And the thing with volunteers is that everybody's got a good heart, and everybody's got good intentions, but and I get in trouble for saying this, Emma. I do get in trouble for saying this, but so many people haven't dealt with their own issues.
Mm-hmm.
So they put up barriers, yeah. They put up barriers that drive survivors even further back. So if I had this 50 million I seen it as a big pot. So there's this big, imagine this big, in Pharaoh times when he had the big gold pot with the gold legs, yeah, like a bath type thing, right? And it was like she was going like that. Put your hands out. She was giving a hand load to everybody, which wasn't having any impact whatsoever. But then she could turn around and say, I gave away 50 million instead of, I mean, this is just a wish, a dream, call it what you will. If you handpicked 50 or 25, handpicked people, fully trained them to deal with the issues of child sex abuse, to have this system in place, like the tree of what's it called? The tree of hearts. You've seen the tree with all the love hearts on it, yeah? So all those love hearts are all the wishes of people. So if you had this tree with these love hearts on it, and you had this one individual at a time, and you said, right, what do you want? What does your life look like? And they get to write on all these love hearts about where they've been and where they want to be. And then they provide, they're in charge of this £50 million, right? So then they provide a system, be it schooling, education, apprenticeship, college, whatever it is. They provide a path there, and that path becomes the gateway for other people. And then we start looking at how we can use this path to join the existing charities together, and giving them money according to their, this is important, according to their, not just their abilities, but their willingness and abilities to be able to join in and help this cause, this journey. And that way you bring everybody together. I know it sounds like some mad dream, but I don't think it's impossible. But you've got this group of 25 people who are in charge of this 50 million. These 25 people have different skills and different experiences, lived experiences, managerial experience, and then we do this runaway train, go through the whole country, pick for the next point in their life. That's what I dream about. That's my dream.
And what would you say to survivors who are struggling or who are getting, maybe ready to speak out, just not quite there yet? What type of advice or hope would you want to say to survivors listening who are going through a hard time?
Pray to God. Pick up your Bible, pray to God. Yeah. Pray to God. God has all the answers. God will give you a way, a truth and the light. It's the only answer, Also, I've even said, right, with my knowledge, what I know, right, if I won £150 million on the lottery, okay, if I won 200 million on the lottery, right, I could either be the most dangerous person in Scotland or the most, not the greatest. I don't want to big myself up. I'm not trying to big myself up. I could be the most dangerous or I could be the most helpful, right?
Yeah, the most giving, most kind.
Right, yeah. So in order to be the most dangerous person, I would concentrate on the people that did these bad things to me and take them all to court. Be waste of money, waste of time, but that's what I would do, right? And then I would spread this evil amongst the child abuse community. Yeah, Dave, these BAs and all these nine. Or I could take the 150 million and say, right, I want to give this to all the charities and do the dream that I just said. And just by doing that and saying, I'm going, and I know I would, because I've got everything I need. I don't need anything. I've got this flat, I've got no debt, I've got these good looks, so I don't need anything else. And I've got Jesus in my heart, so I'm fine. So if I had this 150 million, I'd say, right, I'm going to give this to change the way we deal with the issue of child sex abuse and how we treat survivors in Scotland. And all of a sudden, all these people, the bad people, they wouldn't come forward because we would know them right away. We know who they are. But all these kind people and people who want to do good would come forward. I'd probably get the Church of Scotland to be my safeguarding officers, as opposed to the Catholic Church. The Church of Scotland's the Protestant side. I would probably say to them, right, I want you to stick me away in a monastery somewhere safe so that I don't get mugged. I would say, right, and that's what I would do. I'd probably set up 2 rehab centres run by the church, so it's Bible based, which would be just fantastic. That would be my ultimate dream. And then use the money, pour out to the agencies that you want to work with, rehabs, harm reduction units, all the way down to the charities. And then, 150 million, it doesn't sound like a lot, but again, in a small country like Scotland, I think we could do a lot with that. I really do think we could do a lot with that, I was actually thinking of phoning my mate Donald over in America and asking him for a loan, but I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, that's just a dream, Emma. But you know, because if only we could just, you know, again, it's about, if you learn to lead with your heart, if we go back to lead with our heart and putting our children first, you know, we not only did we turn our back on our children, we turned our back on God, you know, and when you turn your back on God, bad things happen, you know. So we some of us are screaming out for a revival in this country, you know. It's needed really badly, you know. So yeah, again, it's my dream. I know my capabilities, I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses, and I know, and I'm quite sure God's got something even more powerful planned for me. You know, I'm very interested in this. I find myself being really with this fentanyl thing, and this sounds really, I don't know how this might come across, but I don't know. It's like, this sounds crazy. You know, if you want something to numb, this. I don't know nothing about this drug, right? All I know is it's numbing people. You see these, you know, I was down in London not long ago, and I was at the train station, and there was like all these people, about 60 people outside, just, you know, in all kinds of positions, numb. I've seen it all over America as well, and I thought, and I don't even know why I'm saying this. I thought, if they're child sex abuse survivors, they're not in pain. I'm not saying give everybody fentanyl. I'm not saying that, but I remember passing them. I remember thinking, it's a different kind of homelessness, because homelessness, when you're living, suffering with the trauma of child sex abuse, but when you've got this drug this powerful that just wipes out your whole being, but you're still alive. And I'm thinking, how many of them are child sex abuse survivors? And are they feeling pain right now? Because when you see these people on the streets, that it's the whole life. Yeah, you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
I'm not saying give everybody fentanyl, you know. I just
No,
looked at it and I thought,
it's another like escape route, you know. Somebody, it's a way somebody could cope and escape the pain that they're going through.
yeah. That's what I felt. I know I'm not saying give everybody fentanyl, for God's sake, but I just
Of
felt that
course.
I was looking at them, and in their suffering, most of them looked at peace, and it just kind of hit me that way. I thought, this is bizarre. This is strange. You know, to be
Yeah.
standing in the middle of a street, and you've seen all the pictures yourself. You probably passed them in your place where you live. You know, but I try and avoid it. You know, I try and avoid London, and I try and avoid, but it just seems to be hitting my head a lot just lately, thinking about it. I don't want to see it in Scotland. I've not seen it in Scotland yet, and I don't want to. I really don't.
What else did you want to talk about today? Was
Yeah.
there anything else from your travels or anything else that you wanted to update people on today?
Well, as I say, I didn't take any notes. I didn't take any. We both didn't take any notes, because it was a catch up about what had happened over the
Yeah.
last couple of weeks,
Yeah.
and how it marries into historical. It marries into what's been happening for years, and how we're so close now, where more and more people are getting in the conversation of child sex abuse in Scotland. More and more people are reaching out to survivors, which is great. More and more
Yeah.
people now want this inquiry, because as much as I don't want to wish anybody any harm, but this Scottish government has been getting away with this for, as I said, there's all these other inquiries going on, and a lot of people, like whistleblowers, and you know, a lot of people have been silenced. But to do what they've done to the child abuse community, Emma, with so many people put in prison, and I'm an example of that. Somebody who's, I am a good guy. I am a good guy. And now I've got to walk about with this heavy concrete slab in my chest that says criminal, when I know I'm not. And very, very rarely, whether it's on social media or meeting people, do people say, oh, he's a bad one. You know, no, I've not had that. I've not had people sort of, you know, most people are aware that what happened to me happens to lots and lots of people. Just in the last week, with John, my mate who went with me, he saw it. At least 6 people we knew, or we were told of, who were either campaigning for this grooming gang to go away or campaigning for child sex abuse were put in prison. So it just keeps on going on and on. And it's like, when I talk about what God's plan in my life is, what I've been through, Emma, and where we are right now, something very, very big is going to happen. Something very big is going to happen. And Dave Sharp's going to be involved in it. I really believe that. I really do believe that. So this week, as I say, I've got this meeting with this MP who's from the same area. And I was saying, well, why didn't you come and talk to us yesterday when we were on the streets? Why didn't you come then? But anyway, talked on the phone, and she says, right, I need to meet with you face to face. I need to sit down with you, which I'm going to do this week. I'll get back to you in the next couple of days. She works in London half the week, and then the other week in Scotland. I said, if you want me to come down to London, I'm only an hour from London. I live in Northamptonshire. I'm only an hour. I can come down the train. I said, if you want me to go to Scotland, I'll come to Scotland, and I'll show you all this. See, I've got a lot of messages on tweet about these women I spoke about, women who had had to leave the area because the police or the politicians wouldn't listen to them. They just didn't listen. They covered up the whole thing. So, you know, at the same time as I'm going up, I'm hoping that this will encourage other people to join us and start saying, right, now's the time. This is the time where we need to expose this. And yes, we know the time's great because there's an election coming up. And of course, all these politicians want to use it to destroy the government. I'm not political minded, but I'm fine with that, because this government does need to be called out. This government's done some really, really evil things to some very nice people, undeserving people, you know. And if I'm putting myself in the front line, it's happened before. I remember when I told you when I stood outside the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church, and everybody's saying, hang on a minute, you can't do that, you'll get murdered. You're going to stand outside the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church, chained to a 10-foot cross. Are you mad? Are you on drugs? And I said, no, God's told me to do it. I'll be fine. And what happened is the exact opposite from what everybody else thought. Instead of being attacked, all these Catholics came up and said, Dave, this is exactly what we need. This is what we need. Please don't stop doing it. I said, well, hang on, my feet are getting a bit sore. You know, it's also very hot. I was getting sunburned, you know. And yeah, it was like God was showing me and showing the people of Scotland that if you work with survivors, we can deal with these issues. So I'm never going to stop believing that's what's going to happen. Yes, I do get the odd, I know you get the odd trash troll thing, you know, and I've learned to do the block button. You know, we will get the enemy sort of putting his foot in somewhere, you know, but I truly believe that this week could be pivotal. I really do believe that. I mean, I did a tweet last week that got this massive, got me 450 new followers, but only half of it was actually dealt with some of the stuff. I didn't mention the young gangs. I didn't mention the women, the young girls getting photographed. I didn't mention a lot of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait. I'm not going to go on Twitter. I'm going to wait and see where this woman comes back to me, see what happens with that meeting, and see where that takes me. And then if nothing happens, and again, what we're talking about here is we need to everybody has to make sure that these women coming forward are properly protected. That's the number one priority now, Emma. Has to be the number one priority. So all these politicians just want to score points and decry the other side. Then we have to make sure they do it with a proper protection plan in place. Yeah.
And here is that tweet. I have it up on the screen along with Dave's Twitter. He's very active on there. So if you guys want to keep up with him too, his handle is Dave Sharp 59. I'll have that in the show notes also. But he does give his updates on Twitter. So if you guys want to keep up with where he's traveling to, if you guys live in the UK and want to get involved with his campaigns, he's always announcing them on here and trying to get people together, posting articles, posting updates, posting what he's found through his travels. And here is that tweet that got over 1,000 likes to it, tons of shares and lots of followers. And that's so wonderful that this type of material is being shared so far and wide. I'm so happy for you.
Amen. Yeah, it's been nice talking to you again. It's a bit shorter this time, but yeah, always a pleasure, Emma. And again, I just love the what you do. I'm just your biggest fan. Yeah, you're the closest thing I've got to a sister. Yeah, you're absolutely amazing. And again, it's only by working together we'll get this, do what we can.
100%. And I'm so happy to see that your name's getting more recognized, hopefully soon. I know you're being approached by bigger podcasts, which is really exciting. I hope this story and your advocacy work and just the miracle that you are, the hope that you give can be shared more far and wide. So I'm really happy for you that all your hard work is finally being recognized after all these years on a wider scale. That you're able to articulate this so well for people to understand the big picture all the way down to the details, and it's just an absolute honor knowing you, Dave. Every time I talk to you, I'm just filled with hope and inspiration myself, and picturing that little boy that you were. It's going to get me emotional to say this, but he's smiling so much at you. Like, that little boy is so proud of you that went through all of that heinous abuse that you talked about the first couple episodes that we worked together. And he's so incredibly proud of the adult that you became. And so am I. So is everybody that listens to it.
To God be all the glory.
Amen. And again, I'll have Dave's Twitter down in the show notes. Please go connect with him. I'll have all my links as well. Connect with me wherever you can also. We couldn't do this without you guys. You guys are just so incredible with how you support survivors and how you guys come together as a community to get this information out there, support every guest, and just love on them. And I'm so grateful. I couldn't do this without you guys. So for everybody listening, thank you so much for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.
God bless Scotland. Amen.